everybody, I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line. Sean's computer just crashed.
Yeah, little internet outage, never hurt anybody, but did not stopping us today. So we're going to keep on soldiering through. And we've got a fun one to talk about today. And I don't want to make any promises how far we're going to get. We're going to do our best to make it through this entire thing. But let's just take a look. What was that?
And this is why we're having problems with technology. Because
Right.
Dave Sim and technology don't go well together. But yeah, we're returning to Cerebus after a long time. I apologize because I think a lot of people wanted to hear us keep going after we talked about issues 1 and 2. And I think after living in Dave Sim land for however many years that I was during Strange Death, I just needed a break from thinking about, like, I don't know, I just needed to go kind of do my own thing for a while without that connection. But yeah, I think now that we've done Abolition of Man and I've got this new creative burst of energy in a totally different direction, like I can come back to it now. So I'm excited because this is still one of my favorite comics of all time.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this particular book. So this is the very first book of Cerebus, and it represents the first 25 issues of what it ended up being 300 issues, ran over 26 years. And this is the very earliest issues, and the reputation that they have, as we talked about in the other videos, is that these are very crude, or that they're the work of an amateur who made himself better and things like that. But the thing is that I think a lot of that reputation is based on the really heinous reproduction in the earlier versions of this book. And so this is the very best version of this book that you can get right now. I actually worked on this for a really, really long time, did pre-press and restoration for this. And you would think, well, how long does it take to do that for a 550-page book? Well, this is probably the most intensive work anybody has ever done, and on the pre-press end for 550 pages. It was a really, really nutty process. And even though we did this back, I think this was 2016, so it's a long time ago, but I still know which pages are from original artwork, and I still know which pages I did some crazy combination of elements, and which pages were from, irrevocably messed up during the initial photography. And we just went really nuts with it. But so this was the first time, this reread here that I just did is the first time in a really, really long time that I've actually been able to read it as a story. And not just be obsessed with the image the entire time.
The little tiniest, like that one dot in the screen tone pattern looks funky.
Yeah. Exactly right. And making like a mental checklist. Well, the next time that we reprint this.
Oh God, I can't even imagine maintaining that mental checklist over all the volumes. But
yeah, well,
I think volume 1's the worst, right? Because Dave tried about a different technique every issue, and none of that stuff held up. So you were having different restoration solutions with every page almost.
And there's the least amount of original art that I had access to. There's the negative itself. Turned out that there were only like 5 pages or 5 issues that actually had the original negative, and everything else was shot from printed source. And even the pages from the original negative, I didn't actually have the original negative. The printer had destroyed them. They used what's called a copy dot process to transfer them, back in 2005 or 2004 or whatever, and then thought, oh, that's good enough. Off it goes, which meant that most cases you'd be locked into the size that they did it at, and other different things like that. But yeah, I had to develop all these different techniques to manipulate everything and basically make it look as seamless as possible, even though some pages you have like a technique like spatter or something like that, and it from the original artwork it looks fantastic, and then it's right up against one that's from a 3rd generation source. So I still see some of those things, but I did my best to mitigate the differences. And yeah, it's a stunning book. If you've not seen the this particular edition, look for that banner on the top. It's got a 6,000 word essay on the top. And speaking of which, if you don't mind, Carson, I'd like to read the first couple paragraphs, or like 2 paragraphs from the essay in the back.
No, go for it.
Okay.
because you're a
Taken as
fantastic
a
writer as well. On all
oh
these
well, thanks.
remastered editions, there's all these wonderful essays by Sean that, if you're a fan of the book, I think provides a lot of extra context.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Uh, Taken as a whole, 6,000-page Cerebus, the aardvark, is one of the richest, most confounding, most complex, most multi-layered, most singular works of visual narrative art of the last century. This from a comic that began as both a tribute to and parody of Barry Windsor Smith's Conan, a comic born of the twin forces of fanzine culture and the economic opportunities of the comic industry as it transitioned from newsstand distribution to the direct market. It is simultaneously a tribute to artistic development and a craft born of dedication and focus to complexity, to serialization and public development, to the limitless possibilities of genre-free work, a work of great narrative accomplishment hand in hand with aesthetic achievement. It's also funny as hell.
It is, especially this first volume. It's funny as hell, for sure. So you want to jump in and start taking a look?
Let's do it. Yeah. Let's see how far we get.
All right. So we already did a video, and it was a long video about issues 1 and 2. So we'll just go ahead and skip those, and we'll put a link somewhere, and we'll pick up with issue 3.
Yeah, and we should just touch on the fact that each of these issues at the very beginning of this are very episodic. You almost always meet a new character. You almost always have a new situation, and you almost always have a new environment, which allows young Dave to sort of have a different set of things to steal from, magpie-like, and build up his skill set. So in this case, we're still in the environment of the first issue with these sort of vaguely Art Nouveau, Barry Windsor Smith, decorative patterns and plants, etc. But we've got a new character, Red Sophia, which is, of course, a riff on a Conan character, Red Sonja, who was popularized at this time by the gentleman that we're now appearing on the page here. So Frank Thorne was a quite amazing cartoonist who worked on Red Sonja and really popularized her, and had a certain kind of style. And Cerebus has essentially found himself skirting the edge of copyright infringement here.
as all of us in the Dave Sim circle seem to like to do.
Right.
We're all magpies. That's why we all get along.
So he's taken this character and just lifted her and placed her in the issue. The basic sort of thrust of the character being that she's a great swordsman, but also sort of a goofy, one-minded, even sex-crazed person who will be promised to anyone who defeats her in battle. Look at that. The next. Oh yeah, that's a great acting right there.
Yeah, great bit of cartooning. And well, right here, just the 3. See, this is where I disagree. Like, I think Dave's an extremely sophisticated comic artist right out the gate, and some of that is the reproduction, and some of it is he just continues to get better and better and better throughout 26 years. So compared to where he winds up at, right, especially the collaboration with Gerhard, these look crude, but compare it to most other comics, like a sequence like this, that little bum ba dum ba ba, like that's so expertly handled and drawn already. It's like I don't get the sense of amateur at all. This is a very sophisticated comics artist.
You got the 3 fur on the right there too, with the coordinated action.
Yeah. So this wizard guy that's based on Frank Thorne's her dad in the story, right? Sorry, I didn't reread all of these for this.
It is. His name is Henrock Gutch, which is actually Frank Thorne anagram.
Another trick I would do as well. So again, thought patterns.
And Frank Thorne was very popular at conventions for dressing up in that outfit right there. And Wendy Peeney dressed up as a Red Sonia,
Yeah.
and he later had other people as well. Um, and yeah, so it was a very very popular convention thing. So you can see why this would be sort of something he would reach for. And I know that he was communicating with Frank Thorne at the time too. Frank Thorne actually had a piece of fan art appear in the letters page of the second issue.
And I think this is where, well, I guess even the first two issues you see it, but even more than any other issue so far, you see in this one, like I didn't know that was going on in the conventions at the time, but everyone reading it at the time did. And that's what Dave does, is he kind of just sucks in like everything in the zeitgeist and finds
Right.
meaning in it. So the whole, I view Cerebus as like a real meta narrative. Like
Mhm.
all these other narratives become symbolic tools within this bigger narrative that he's putting together, which is a fascinating strategy to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like contra to some of the larger opinions that get voiced about this. Like, I don't think you need to know the source is necessarily to do it, because it brings its own sort of authority with it. Although maybe sometimes it like could be frustrating to not know what's being referenced. You get the reference. I mean, this is a you know it's a familiar kind of thing. I also
Yeah.
like how he's not afraid of being too big for his britches. Like on the lower left hand panel there, you've got this extreme angle, and the thing is, it's actually way too extreme. Like we would be seeing the back of the guy's butt, um,
Or
based
he's
on the angle.
standing on a table.
Right.
Like that's his foot. Like,
Right.
yeah, that makes no sense. Because the horizon line is set about at Cerebus's eye, I would say.
Right.
It
Yep.
seems like, so yeah, he's standing on a table or a chair.
Yeah. So he's not afraid to go for the ambitious storytelling thing that sometimes he's not up for yet in terms of drawing uh, an
Well,
early
but
example.
also, well, like he needs this bit of information in his mind for whatever
Right.
reason. So that was a conversation Dave and I had a number of times, and I know he talked about having that conversation with Gerhard too, where he just realized Gerhard was a literalist, and so it's like I got to let Gerhard be literal. But he would constantly be pushing him and me as well. Is like, okay, yeah, that's where the shadow should go, but
Right.
compositionally it doesn't work as well, so just put it over here. And I think, you may be looking at those kind of decisions already here
Right.
too. It's like, yeah, that's not proper, but it makes sense and it looks good. So screw it.
Yeah. And the sense of rhythm in this issue is really interesting. Like, the time passing slices, and every single tier being divided up into these even chunks, and it really helps the entire issue have a sort of, I mean, animation aspect to it.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of Dave Dave's style of storytelling throughout the entire series, and that's established even from issue one. But yeah, there's these kind of animatic sequences here, where you have the same background and the characters move across it, or the ones where it's a continuous background broken up. Before
Right.
we move on, though, I'd like to point out the gigantic penis tent with the vagina on it. Um, like not because I want to make a silly crude joke, but because that comes back hundreds
Yeah.
of issues later.
Yeah.
That symbolism of the tent flaps as like the vulva, he uses that
Right.
like at least one other time.
I think we're
uh,
talking. Yeah, I think you're literally talking 270 issues later.
hmm yeah. And issue two has some stuff in it that you know is important to the whole series. So when you reread it, these throwaway stories, you see how he worked, which is he didn't necessarily have the whole idea in place, but he'd start scattering ideas, and then you could
Right.
go back and pick up certain things. And because
Right.
of the way like our brains work, it's like we're not going to notice the things he doesn't pick up, but the things he does pick up, you go, wow, he really had this amazing plan the whole time.
Right. Yeah, and then there's some other things that just don't quite ever gel. One of the things being that in some of the early issues, you can tell that people regard him as a beast of some type, or other
Mm-hmm.
than. But once you are out of the first volume, it's pretty clear that most other people, other than people who are like magically affiliated, see him as a deformed human being.
or at least, or at least yeah, because it's not like there's a whole bunch of aardvarks. There's only what, 3?
Yeah,
And people are aware that it is an aardvark and that it's a different kind of thing, but they don't really interact with him any differently.
exactly. People just sort of, we don't get it like an image of it except in a sketchbook that he drew one time around high society. But essentially, people just regard him as something that's a person who something is wrong with.
Yeah.
Um, and whereas in the early issues, he has like a few references to like a sort of pride of identity and things like that. Look at that gradation there happening as he gets sicker and sicker. Uh,
Yeah, that's an amazing. And there's that tint again. Is this not the issue where the scabby boob joke is at?
no, no, no.
No, that's way
Coming back to
later.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, he's been instructed to torment this guy, and the way that he torments this guy is forcing him to marry Red Sophia. Because as of this particular point, Cerebus has no interest in women at all, or
Yeah,
sex
yeah,
or anything like that.
yeah.
Although in later later in the series that will become an acquired taste. Yeah.
There
This
are some phallic swords a la Berserk. So Berserk Volume 1, Cerebus Volume 1, they do line up.
this is a sort of running trope that Cerebus is wildly competent, and other people are incompetent
Yeah.
compared to him. In this case, this guy is just unable to just fappity thap thap right on his head, um, passively reacting as he's tied up to a giant bird statue.
The design on that bird statue is amazing, by the way.
Yeah, it really is.
This is probably something that looked awful until you got a hold of it with that dot pattern in there. That like noise pattern, I imagine, was a hell of a thing to clean up.
Yeah, it's not as bad as you might think in this particular issue. It was really issue dependent, and
Mm,
different issues had different paper, different issues were treated different ways, and so this particular one, even though most of it is sourced from newsprint copies, it's really not that bad. I could clean it up and shrink it down a little bit, and it was ready to go,
okay,
as
cool.
compared to some of the other issues. Um, but yeah, so Cerebus, solves the thing in an ingenious way, which is, of course, another one of the sort of tropes of the character. He comes into a new situation. There's some type of twist at the end, and then he, sometimes solves the twist, or other times has his, what he thinks he's gained is robbed or taken away from him.
Yeah.
Very similar trope to sort of early like serialized adventure stuff, where the expectation was that the audience needed to be able to come in fresh every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's smart. Like Dave did the first 12 issues or so that way, and then he tests out like a 3-issue arc, and I think that's the right way to do it while still building the world. So you have self-contained. I can jump in, I can pick up issue 6 and know nothing about it and have a good time, but there's a bigger story building, and I think my when I reread Cerebus like straight through for the second time, the big thing I noticed, because I was reading digital scans of the original issues, so they had the letters and stuff, is I enjoyed watching the performative aspect of how Dave behaved in the back matter
Right.
related to the book. And so that's one of my big theses about Cerebus that we won't get in these volumes. But in volume 1, really you get this barbarian wanderer character trying to get riches, and it kind of
Right.
keeps slipping out of his fingers. And then Dave, you have Dave as like this new artist on the scene coming in. Um, he's kind of exploring in the same way. He's trying out new styles. Like every issue is kind of a different thing. He's trying out a different approach. I'm adding this technique, I'm taking this technique away. Like he's grabbing things are slipping through his hands. So I feel like the first volume, Dave is kind of on that opening journey of
Right.
the barbarian, it just as Cerebus is, and he's kind of inhabiting the character in that way.
Yeah. And that sort of take everything that you can, and see what happens of it. like what happens when I put this piece into this other piece is really on full display in the next issue, because that is the introduction of a certain fan favorite character, Elrod the albino. Uh, and Elrod is sort of the ultimate example of this technique and sort of the dividends that it can pay. In the case of Elrod, every single aspect is borrowed, or if you like, stolen from something else. So you have the name. There's a fantasy writer named Michael Moorcock who had a series about an albino warrior, the last son of a dying race, with a black sword, named Elric.
Yeah.
Uh, and so you have Elrod, the albino. Elric's appearance is borrowed entirely from a, I don't even remember who the artist was, but there's a Marvel adaptation of the Elric story.
Isn't that the P. Craig Russell?
Is it? I'm not sure if P. Craig Russell was the originator of it, but
he did a Michael Moorcock's Elric for Epic.
Gotcha. Okay, no, it was earlier than that, much earlier than that. And it might have even been Barry Windsor Smith, but basically this very distinctive, funny hat here, which, you know, Elrod himself talks like Foghorn Leghorn,
which is a strange mishmash.
Right, and so you just pass by, pass by one of these one-liners that's going to be immortal. Mind your manners, son. I got a tall, pointy hat. Status, boy. You can argue with me, but you can't argue with status.
And the hat just looks like a dunce hat until he takes it off. And then I love the design element of like this little bit on the back to like help keep it on his head or something. Right. Like it won't fall off when you turn your head back. It hits your shoulders. It's a strange device. This is probably in the early issues one of my favorite ones, and I think that's why the character became so popular, is the whole little misadventure that him and Elrod get into in this story is pretty funny.
And Elrod is hilarious, and of course making him have this voice, making him have the appearance of this other character, and the sort of haughtiness of the other character and sort of the fantasy aspect, genre, just enables Dave's writing to just leap off the page. He just goes nuts because he's already got these sort of frames there. And, it's one of those things you could just tell somebody the concept. Oh, he's an albino with a pointy hat who thinks he's a really good fighter, but he's not. And he talks like Foghorn Leghorn. And
you'd be like, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. The other thing I like is he's always talking about like he thinks Cerebus is wearing like a bunny costume. Right. So that's when you're talking about people treating him like a malformed animal early on. Like he sees his appearance and he's kind of constantly talking about like, boy, why are you wearing that? Why are you wearing that funny costume?
Right. And it's actually played later that is actually a distinction that Elrod has from other characters. And, Elrod makes jokes about a seersucker suit and has other sort of out of time elements that other characters don't have.
Look at the cartooning on that face, though. Come on, you can't tell me that that's amateur. So that's expert level, like animal cartooning already. No,
it certainly is. I think where the amateurishness comes is the inconsistency. But that we got to give him a break here. I mean, we're still talking about the fourth issue, but you can
how old was Dave at this time?
Well, so we're probably talking about, he did them bi-monthly, so I think he's still probably 25.
Okay, so he didn't start like in his teens. He's like
no.
Okay.
Yeah, he started as a cartoonist.
Here's another thing that I like in early Cerebus is watching Dave develop his bag of tricks. And here's a Dave, and by bag of tricks, I mean I'm one guy, eventually two guys, running a whole company, being a publisher, which now that we started engaging in those, how much time that takes. Yeah, that's like all day, and he still managed to write and read and everything he needed to read to research all of these, right, and draw it. And so he comes up with this bag of tricks like this, where you just will stat a background and save time, and then just cut and paste the character over it. but it never feels like a cheap trick with Dave. It always makes sense in the story, and that's what I find most impressive about his time saver tricks. They actually
Right.
oftentimes put constraints that lead to more interesting pages and more interesting comics.
Yeah, and I think that his design sense being so strong is also, part of the, I mean, part
Yeah.
of the part of what makes it work so well. By the way, every single issue so far has ended with the character in silhouette becoming diminished.
Yeah,
Just
Matt Dow was the
yeah,
first person to point that out,
yeah,
as far as I know. And then Dave was like, "Hey, it's been like 40 years, and you're the first person who finally noticed that." That's the other
yeah,
strange thing is when you talk to Dave about these, his memory of like every decision
yes, unbelievable.
is he can explain to you like, oh yeah, well this character would do that, and when I was inking this like that, and it's like, how do you remember every? It's nuts. So
Yeah,
that's the end of that issue. I don't. What's the plot arc there? What happens by the end? What
you
does he
know,
get?
yeah. What has he lost and gained?
Yeah,
It's a little bit less. I think that this one is a little bit more about Elrod as a character going nuts. But yeah, you do get that glorious fight scene.
but also there's some orb that he's found, some shiny, well, not orb, but a gem, and he kind of thinks this is a curse, and that's a common theme too, because the glowing orb becomes just like the big bad guy of Cerebus in the
Right.
end. And there's been
Hmm.
a number of these glowing spherical or circular objects already in the
Yeah.
book, so it's interesting to me to see that. And then he's like, well, I'm gonna just get rid of this thing. I'd rather be poor than hold on to this thing that's as
Right.
far as I can tell, driving my life off a cliff.
We should say that particular issue, by the way, came up in the entirety of the original art for it. I had none of that when working from this. I had to work from print copies for the entire issue, and I did as good as I could. And
Hmm.
then the entire issue came up from Heritage for
Oh,
auction, and they kindly let Kevin, who has a scanner now, go there and visit and scan the entirety of the issue. So I actually have restored this recently.
again.
And yep, again, and whenever there'll be another printing, it'll have, another entire issue from original art. This next one does not suffer at all from that, and for two different reasons. One is the photography was outstanding on the entire issue. Number two, I actually had copy dot scans in the negative, and number three, the printing was actually fantastic of this issue for whatever reason. And it's just got, you can just tell he's trying out totally different things. We have a Barry Windsor Smith grass field there, but it's like becoming more Dave like
And
through
you can
repetition.
tell the fidelity of the printing back here, because he's done, it looks like he's actually hand stippled it. Maybe that's a noise pattern paper. Do you know what that
Yeah,
is back there?
yeah, no, that's a noise pattern, and it's overlapped twice. So you have
Twice. But the
one layer
fidelity
of
of that
it.
is really, there's
Yeah,
no clog at all. The dots are really tiny, so
yeah.
that looks nice.
No
This
original art
one,
for this, despite the fact that I know where that splash page is, but that person is not going to scan it for me. So
not gonna scan it. That's too
I know
bad.
where you are.
That's too
I don't need it
bad.
though.
One of the funny things in this issue is you get this sense, they start describing him when he gets wet, right? Like
Yes.
the smell doesn't serve to brighten the earth, or no, uh yeah, the odor of wet aardvark fur, the smell doesn't serve to brighten the earth pig's disposition. So he stinks so bad when he gets wet that even he can't live with himself. And that fact comes up here and there throughout the series, always to comedic purpose.
Right. And these guys who he comes across, it turns out, are Picts, or sorry, pigs. I don't even know how you'd say that, which
Pick
is a
picks.
pun on Pict, which is an ancient, unremembered race of people who there's much speculation on. It's a pun of that in pig, um, which gives you an idea of the sort of pull and see. Uh,
And their leader's name is Bran McMuffin.
right. Which is also a play on a character from Conan in the Roy Thomas Barry Windsor Smith Conan. Would you go back one page?
Yeah.
This is uh, Lee from Top Shelf, works from Top Shelf. He's an editor for Top Shelf. Used to write a blog about the first few issues of Cerebus, and he said this is one of the saddest things in one of the early issues. Um, if you'll forgive us, friend, your fur seems to, that is, the smell is, Service realizes the problem and is sympathetic. He can barely stand the smell himself. Perhaps a little distance will help. He's standing like 15 feet away.
Yeah,
How's
like
this? Excellent. The stinging in my nostrils is barely noticeable.
this page is also like the oppressive monotony of that like completely vertical rain.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Like I mean, just over and over. But he's definitely willing to do like a less rigid rain. Like this is much more like what you would expect on a rain scene. And then for some reason, for 2 pages, he really just pounds you down with it. And those are the
Yeah.
kind of decisions that I guarantee if you talk to Dave, he would be like, oh yeah, I sat there and I thought about it, and this was the effect I was going for. And like nothing, that actually it's a six pages worth of it. None of that stuff is just because, like, it's always
Mhm.
an explanation for it. Anyways, these pigs live underground, and they're taking Cerebus into their underground little community society here, and Cerebus sneaks out at night and hears this big kind of ceremony going on, and comes to realize that all this time they've been underground worshiping a statue that looks much like Cerebus.
And he is more than a little alarmed by this, and basically sees their meeting happening there and approaches the statue in the middle of the night. And
Here's another one of those great Dave Sim, like
yeah,
one background broken up animatic type of things.
yeah, the Sterankoism,
Yeah.
and look at the cartooning there and the close up of the eye. He sees the statue reflected in his own eye, and you've got these, juicy brush lines. One of the first instances of the brush really taking over like that. A surprising amount of it, by the way, in this first volume. Really not
Yeah.
something that I remember associating with the artwork, but
Yeah.
and he just pummels the thing. And it's interesting because you get this sort of supplied monologue that gives you an idea of, the thoughts in his head. He could portray the Redeemer. He could lead the Picts east. He had seen armies driven by religious zeal. With 24 of these handcrafted weapons, he could lay waste to the primitive lands to the feld. There'd be a lot more looting than a king could imagine. He had only to acknowledge a kinship to the Pict god. There would be
Yeah, and
golden by the ton.
it's interesting because given where the story goes with this, like the next however many volumes is just a pretty fast climb
Yeah.
up the power hierarchy, and this is the
Mm-hmm.
first instance where he's like offered that and he really hates it and turns it down. So that's part of the interesting character arc of Cerebus, I think, is watching him be this wild rebel, which I imagine Dave must have felt like too, and he was getting offers from like Disney at some
Correct.
point. And I feel like he was also being given these opportunities that he was turning down.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like Cerebus, he did ascend to like the heights of the industry at a point. And I think that shows that early, like, no, I'm going to cut my own path. And like Cerebus has that. And then the longer you do something and you have to take it seriously and professionally, then it's easier to get sucked into those kind of hierarchical
Correct.
structures. And I think that shows up in the story pretty well.
Yeah. For me, of all the early issues, this is the one that is the most successful for me as a unit, both
Mhm.
visually and storytelling. And part of it is just because he keeps it in the one location or the two locations. You've got like a real strong thematic, uh, you know, arc that also resonates with the other stuff. And also, because he's keeping a lot of the designiness of the different scenes, it enables him to focus on the cartooning and, actually get some bounce to the line for the first time. for Cerebus himself. A little bit less like an animation sticker stuck into a Barry Windsor Smith
Well, it's funny
pastiche.
because I was looking at it on this page actually, and on this one, this drawing here is terrible. It
Hmm.
looks like he got a Sharpie and just kind of clumsy outlined Cerebus, and it looked like there was probably a leg or something over here that got colored
Yeah,
over.
yeah, yeah.
But then
But look at the one to the left. Yeah, that's
yeah,
unbelievable. I mean,
and
that's
this, so you can kind of see like here's the marker Cerebus, and here's the learning how to use my nib pen like a brush Cerebus.
right. Well, and it
And
wasn't just a nib pen. I think at this stage he's still using a lettering pen that was flat. So each of these contour lines that you're seeing were done with a flat lettering pen. I mean, that's just
that's why these ones look like they were done with a Sharpie.
exactly because the angle was wrong for the line.
Yeah,
Uh,
interesting. But you talk about him as a designer, and you just
right.
look at the way he utilizes the black, and that's something that Dave was always a master of, is saturating a page in black, and again, not having it look like a cop out, but having it seem like a good design decision.
Right. And like a valid space.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Like he'll put just enough. Okay, we'll give you that one bit of cross hatching in the back, and your brain will fill it in. Like I don't need to
right.
spend time on that. It's
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah, it really is. And you can see how much the these issues are moving. So all of that stuff is going to come back. I mean, 200 issues later,
Yeah.
and going to come back in an authoritative, like a way that feels significant. And you keep on putting ingredients in the pot. Do you know about uh, shoot, pottage
No.
as a concept?
No.
Uh, I might be using the wrong word. There's a certain kind of basically like the main eating that people did in Europe. Medieval Europe was essentially like a perpetual stew. You just kept it
Oh,
on the fire at all times, and the stew would change flavor over time as people added things to it.
that actually sounds kind
Um,
of good.
yeah, and you just keep it going forever, right?
Yeah.
So I think about that in this early stage because each time that he adds this other ingredient, you're getting a sort of like different flavor to it.
I
And
think
when
that's
he's
why a lot of people fall off as fans. I mean, I know he offended a lot of people too, but I think it's just the constantly shifting kind of nature of what the book is too. Like people fall in love. Like when I first read Cerebus, this is the first thing I read. And so I fell in love with the comedic aspects of it. Like that's what
right,
I loved about the book at first, was it cracked me up. And then that goes away, and like I could see a lot of people dropping out. Luckily, like I was able to just find something I liked in each iteration of the kind of approach. But I could see that as the stew changes flavor, like some people are going to be like, yeah, I liked it when it was really meaty, but it tastes very beany now. So
right.
like it's just, it makes sense. Look at this drawing on this face. This is some of the better faces, even still. I mean, this is still a good Dave Sim face right here.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I said, it's the consistency that's lacking, or the amount of the bad ones, and
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. Like, I mean, this is what you do to learn. I and it helps too that this issue is the other one that we ended up having full original art for.
Oh, well, this is a hell of an issue to have that for, because this
Right.
is for the character. I think this is, well, I guess meeting Red Sophia is pretty important too, but this is
Hmm.
really the crux point for for everything that comes in the future. For the look at this, this is Alex Raymond skinny, or that's he
Right.
still draws the hair exactly like that. How crazy is that, that this is 25-year-old Dave, and he's still like, Alex Raymond's hair was still drawn almost exactly like that. But anyways, plot wise, we're meeting probably the second most important character in the book,
Hmm.
and
And
probably the most beloved character.
yeah, and a character who you know reading it like this, you really don't get the idea. When she comes back in high society, it was such a huge deal. It was like, oh, this
Hmm.
character talked about and had her off page. She sort of benefits from what I call the third man effect. The movie The Third Man, starring Orson Welles. except Orson Welles is only actually in 8 minutes or something in the movie.
Hmm.
But people talk about him continually throughout. So like Jaka makes this one appearance in this one issue, and then we spend 40 or 50 issues people talking about her.
Hmm.
And then when she finally shows up, he knocks it out of the park. I said 40 or 50 issues. I think it's 25 issues or something.
Yeah,
No, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, she comes
it's
back
a
at like
while.
40 or something. Yeah.
She's
And
mentioned a lot throughout High Society.
right.
Well, so Jaka, and is it defined this early on that she's like what her family is, or is she just like the most
No,
beautiful dancer?
it's the most beautiful dancer that he's ever seen, because he's under a love potion. So essentially, like, these dudes, these scummy guys, give him a potion so that they can manipulate him. They give him something that makes him more suggestible, and instead, it makes him fall in love with her.
And this is the
And
first time he's shown any kind of sexual interest. Like when Red Sophia is sexual, it's like, no, that's gross, that's disgusting. Like,
right, right, yeah,
why would
totally.
you talk about that? Look at this.
Right.
He's drawing with white here on
Hmm.
this character. That's interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot of white, and that was one of the things that I was really happy about actually having the original art. Because, like, you'll see, like, the next page, there's a gradation created behind Cerebus's head, uh, with the white and those hatching marks, and that is completely invisible in the original printing.
On this panel here.
Yeah, see the gradation behind his head,
Oh, up
going up.
here. Yeah. Oh, okay. Wow. And that wasn't even printed in the original. Wow.
Yeah, all those white marks were gone. And you can, if you look through the original art, and look at the original printings, you can get an idea of how he was sort of disincentivized to do certain kinds of techniques. And there's this one particular issue that, well, like one of Gerhardt's first issues, where they add a technique and the printer totally botched it, and it looked terrible, and so they never did it again. Uh, but it looks awesome now. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Which is
um,
interesting to think, like, if this would have reproduced well,
right,
300 issues may have had reductive drawing with white, but it didn't
exactly.
reproduce well. And so he just like abandons it
Yeah,
entirely or mostly.
yeah.
Look at the cartooning on that. The line weight work on her legs is pretty bad. He's still struggling with line weight, but that cartooning is great.
Well,
And then
yeah,
this
it's
whole
it's
fight scene here. And his lettering, you can already see his masterful lettering too in a lot of these early issues. We've been skipping over that. But these whole panels where he'll avoid the real, like here he's actually, this guy's bashing, another strange death moment there almost. But a lot of times he'll avoid the violence and let you fill it in and just use like the or the sexual stuff too. He'll just have like
right.
sound effects, and I think that's a very, very wise choice.
Yeah, and
Thump, 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 thump. And you can see how he's able to make you laugh with his lettering, which is impressive as well.
hmm
So anyways, this character Jaka, you'll come to find out later. Spoiler alerts, we're gonna talk about the whole series, but she's the niece, is that correct,
yeah,
of
hmm
Lord Julius, who's a very powerful political player. So she's kind of like a princess figure basically
right.
within the story. And much later you'll find out why, but she has left that bougie life and gone to just be a tavern dancer because that's what she really likes to do. And so he's
Right.
falling in love with her here just as a tavern dancer. He doesn't know all these other familial connections that she has.
Yeah, and they have a lot of cute interactions, and it gives a lot of opportunity for, once again, for one-liners and other things of that nature. And, he promises to kill a yak for her, and wants to drink apricot brandy out of her navel. And, would you drink apricot brandy out of my navel if I had one?
And then he says we can go see the Great Wall of
See
Sai
here, right?
Smina, and they visit that
Yeah,
hundreds of issues later, right? So he's saying
yep,
like, come journey with me, and he's like, but it means you'd have to stop dancing. No, you can still dance for me though. Jewels, I'll buy. He's just promising her the world. I'll get you jewels and gold and travel and look at Thor here with his little chest. And this, look at that.
Yeah,
The
the
cartooning
little,
on that and the little point.
this is an example of one of the ones where all I can see is all the work I did, because every single piece of screen tone was shrunk to probably 80% of what it was, and so it's just brutal to look at and think about all of the work.
So you were having to go back in and like the screen tone would have shrunk to here and you're having to digitally fill in to here.
Exactly.
So for
Yeah.
people who are, I know there's a lot of retro materials coming back into style, and people are like using physical screen tones and physical duotone paper and stuff. They're not archival.
No,
And restoring them is going to be a pain in the ass. So make sure that you get amazing scans of them now, and then as they degrade to all hell, it won't really matter.
Exactly. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, and so it's interesting, like, just as far as once again, he plays it safe and keeps the entire thing happening essentially one location, and really enables him to focus on the strengths that he has, and work out the problems. So he's you know essentially asked to draw a pretty woman for the first time, um,
Yeah,
in the
by
context of the
himself.
comic. And
Asked by
yeah,
himself.
and
Well, Red
right, exactly.
Sophia is pretty. Well, she's
Yeah,
more busty, sexy, I guess.
different kinds of things. Yeah, but you can see that, like, throughout the issue he improves, and basically, but what I mean by improve is hitting the middle, or the hitting, not knocking it out of the park the entire time, but hitting like that last panel there where it's an expressive face
Yeah.
that is communicating the character, and is communicating the moment, and also looks like the panel before.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jaka really, he's got something he's aiming for that he chases for a while before he really resolves her look. I feel like that with
Yeah.
obviously Cerebus too. A lot of the characters he keeps morphing their look. That's fun to track. But here it's strange, like she refers to herself in the third person here.
Yeah, and later on says that she thought that he was joking with her, basically, and that she went ahead and used that convention to go along with him.
Oh, is that how Dave explains how she doesn't do that
Yeah,
in later issues? Okay, that's smart.
exactly.
But
Yeah,
basically, like they realize they love each other, but they're just like, it's not going to happen. And so she walks away.
well, he doesn't remember anything. Yeah, at least that's what he says. Uh, he doesn't have any recollection of being drugged at all, and is shocked that she's going to give him apricot brandy. I'd like
Oh,
you to have
okay.
this.
So he's walking away and she's sad.
Yeah, and says that Jocko will wait for that day, beloved, even if it takes the rest of your life.
Yeah. And then you get Dave's obsession with cross hatching for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 78. So each of these ones has come out every 2 months at first, and I believe it started turning into a monthly book right around this time. If it's not this exact issue, it was the one previous.
Mm-hmm.
But previous to that, his plan had been to take a month off every time. But I think he realized with the sales being good enough, and also realized that, like, it was not doing his chops any favor to be out of it for that long.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not like
And
he
then
was using 2 months to draw every issue.
when did he decide it was going to be 300 issues?
We're coming up on that. That's
Around issue 12.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, so like that, once you make that decision too, it's like, well, you better be doing a monthly book. Otherwise you're going 50 years instead of 25
Right. Well,
years.
no, yeah. Sorry, his initial thing was it was going to be 150 issues.
Okay.
But as soon as it was for sure monthly, he reversed that.
So basically he committed to 24-ish years, and then okay, I can
Exactly.
do twice as much.
Yep.
Look at
That's
this.
right.
The wave.
Yeah. So yeah, the internal page design is really something else. But yeah, we've got Elrod, the return of Elrod, and essentially a reprise of the previous Elrod issue. in the sense that the two of them are going to go, have an adventure together. And they're going to sneak into where this priest. That's quite the bird there, huh? The bird
Yeah,
statue there.
actually, I was mixing this up with the first Elrod story. This is the
Right.
one that cracks me up so much, where they're running around and he's talking about the kid in the rabbit suit, and yeah, that bird,
Right.
Jesus.
Yeah. So we've got an actual. He's one of these priests, and he's smaller than all of the other ones, and so it's essentially got like a death cult that lives underground. The Black Sun cult, and one particular guy feels like he doesn't have any respect, and so he dresses up as their totemic thing described in their writings, and it happens to look like Cerebus.
Yeah, the description of their deity. So this is now wrapping in. This is like the first time where you get a repetition of a character, and then he's wrapping back in this idea that there have been these creatures that have been worshipped as powerful in the past that you saw with the Picts, and now you're getting it again with this guy. So
Right.
you're really in this issue starting to build the world. Look at this. This is
Yeah.
that not Brand Eck, that Marvel like
Hmm.
parody kind of Mad Magazine. I feel like I've seen that drawing.
Interesting.
I feel like I've seen this other places than Cerebus. Something about that image, but really good, like horror image almost.
Hmm. Yeah.
I feel
The
like
the, the
he's tapping into some he's getting past the Barry Windsor Smith stuff too. Like he's
yeah.
starting to add like this is not a Barry Windsor Smith approach so much, and some of what's going on with this character looks more Bernie Wrightson-y to me.
Hmm.
Some of what's going on here,
Yeah. I think you're right.
like
the
this
the
kind of,
conti- right. What is that anyway?
I don't know. But the fact that Elrod is like, hey, it's a kid in a bunny suit. That must be
Right.
Cerebus. Like that's how poor his perception of what he's looking at with Cerebus is he can't tell
Right.
the difference. And that's I remember just busting a gut out loud the first time I got Cerebus trade paperback and actually read it in 2000. It had to be 2004 because I was waiting till the series ended to start reading it. I wanted to make
Right.
sure it actually made it all the way. So as soon as it ended, then I went and bought the first Cerebus trade, and I remember just absolutely dying at this issue.
I just love how this guy has two sets of eye holes in his ridiculous costume here. He
Well, I
can
think
look
that's
out the
supposed to
side
be.
of the head.
Oh yeah, you can look either way, and then the nose. Like, what is this? Is this the nose? The nose is down. I don't know
That's
what I.
that's Cerebus's eyes. So like that's the description of their deity. He's got two, he's got one eye thing and two eyeballs inside it. It's like
Oh, that's like the eye with two pupils.
exactly. Yep.
That's crazy. So sorry, I hadn't reread this to refresh for
Yeah.
this
No.
episode, so some of those details are.
Well, I don't think he describes it while he's making the costume, but
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Well,
But
so
yeah.
something else that people for people who only have ever read these in the trades and haven't read the original issues, I really do think that there's a lot that's being missed out on, as dense and as compelling as it is on its own. In those early issues, Dave is working with Denny's brother, whose name
Yeah.
I forget, but there are like
Michael
these
Lubert.
one or two, yeah, Michael Lubert. There are these like world of Cerebus text bits in the back that explain the politics and those kinds of things. So there was a bigger sense of the world. Those things like the description of the deity, the explanation of why there's a TARIM and a TERIM,
Right.
like those kind of things are kind of being explained in the back, and you don't get those in the collected versions. I don't think you need them, but for the people that really get into all the details of that kind of stuff, that is to be found in the original issues.
Although I did fight for and succeed in getting the map designed by Michael Lubert and drawn by Dave to get in the front of this collected edition, which I think really adds to the entire thing. But yeah, that's what I was talking about in the little excerpt that I read from the back matter, is that this really is a sort of clubhouse, like let's put on a play, let's see what happens kind of thing. And I quote somebody in the back of the issue who Dave confirmed that he knew her, who was friends with Denny and Michael and Dave at the time,
Mm.
who basically said Elrod was secretly based on somebody they all knew.
Who talked with that like foghorn leg on? Hey, how you doing? Like, is that?
I I think she didn't specify other than to say that his take on the guy was so clever and so on in most ways that the guy never knew that it was based on him.
Oh
So I think
wow.
probably the obliviousness and the sort of willingness to just push ahead no matter what, is that my guess. But there were examples of that. Like you said, Michael Lubert wrote these text pieces. And as far as I know, Dave didn't intentionally violate any of those things when he made the series. He had this
Yeah,
other restraint that was put on him, right? Because somebody who's not him is like writing material, making up the names of all the places. Like
yeah,
Michael Lubert wrote, wrote the names of all those places, and like he was like stuck with it, but he uses it to great effect.
yeah,
Um, it's all grist for the mill.
yeah. Well, and I mean that's how Dave works when you collaborate with him. I think that's the biggest thing that you notice is no matter what you give him, he'll make it better. Like,
Right.
and it will happen within minutes. Like,
Yeah.
you'll send him a nub of an idea, and the next day you'll get like 10 pages of mocked up jokes and
Right.
stuff. And I think he just that's his greatest ability, is to process anything and then immediately find a use for it in a new
Right.
context to say something different. It's not just thievery, it's really processing. And here, I mean, come on. Like, this is what issue were we on now? This
Yeah.
is 7 or 8. and
Hmm.
and so already you've got a guy doing compositions like this
Yeah.
and
So we
nailing it.
yeah,
Like,
Cerebus
you
is in
don't
the
get lost, it works. It like,
no, it's quite amazing. So yeah, he's drugged again, which is an inter-issue device that'll come up a couple
a
more
lot.
times.
Yeah.
But it's useful to move us to a new location and not feel like you have to explain what happened in the midst of it.
Yeah, that's how Dave gets Cerebus to new places. He just drugs him every time. That's the
Right.
Deus Ex Machina, is a good roofie.
And he's been taken over by these really, really funny uh, folks that we'll get to see, but they've got basically a prince who's addicted to cocaine, uh, an effeminate prince addicted to cocaine. And actually, here's an example of the thievery that really doesn't work. Is on page 169. Uh, he's essentially stolen the Star Trek, like, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a." But
Not a martyr.
yeah, but that's the only joke. Like, it's just a stolen joke, and so without importing any of the context, it doesn't. It kind
Yeah.
of falls flat for me. And so, like, you can even see like some of, he doesn't do that later. He doesn't import a punchline.
Without the setup. Yeah.
Exactly right. He'll take the situation or take the character and see what it does in the new situation. But this is an example of falling flat. A rare
Yeah.
example, I think.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you see, like you said, this grew out of like the fanzine culture and stuff. So
Right.
you see a lot of those in-joke elements. This is an Easter egg laden series, and that's what I mean by a meta narrative. But it's not just each Easter eggs for the sake of a joke most of the time. The Easter eggs usually add up to some greater statement too. And I think
Right.
what's happening here is that it is just the throwaway punchline without
Yeah.
context. Um, I love this page here. This is one of the first ones I've seen flipping through where Dave starts playing around with meta compositional tricks, and he
Hmm.
extends that to a whole issue eventually.
Yeah.
But here you have a tangent that runs through his leg, through this whole like fisheye lens distortion of the ground, and then right up into whatever the top of the building this is here, the top of the roof. So you have this big extra, like, thumb pushing down in the composition almost.
Right.
And I just think that kind of page design is very sophisticated, and you can see, he's starting to think, oh, I can do things by combining shapes. And
Right.
like, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with that yet, but when he gets there, it's really cool.
Yeah, and also in this case, he's teasing out something he'll have in the other thing where it's you get the internal blacked out on the periphery of the reality, uh, and that'll be something that comes back in a more heightened kind of way, like
Yeah, and while
Cerebus
he's
being
sorry, go ahead.
good. Good.
While he's being drugged here, he can hear them conversing, and that's
Right,
part of his hallucination, basically.
right. So you're visually demarcating what is passed out, what's reality, which is very interesting.
Well, and he's
Well,
using that trick of like the reality is always in a grid, and then
right,
like the only reason the grid gets bent is because the unreal panel is bent, and it just happens to be
right.
like layered on top of, but they fit within these vertical grids. Oh, and
Yeah.
he's
So
hallucinating Elrond.
he goes and kills all of the people hallucinating that they're Elrod and Red Sophia.
And then here's your
Which
dandy prince, huh?
right.
Who's this guy? This is definitely a character of somebody, because that's got the look of Dave doing a character.
Interesting. I don't know.
That face looks like he was drawing a specific person to me. These ones, not so much. These look more like his
Yeah.
stock faces, but this one really looks like a character of somebody.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning. Dave had a one of the earliest VCRs. This is later,
Mm.
much later than this, but he had an early VCR and would had lots of things on tape and would tape stuff and like freeze frame things to like
For
sort of gather
reference.
reference material. Yeah,
That's
not
an
not
interesting
in these
strategy.
issues. This is 78 still or 79, but
That's a smart strategy. So here I'm seeing a couple other things. This shows back up hundreds of issues later. The idea of Cerebus kind of like trapped on top of a box instead of in a box, but like chained to a box by a bunch of wise guys. And then also here you get a premonition. Here he's being like the military leader, but you get a premonition of him as he moves up into being the prime minister and then the Pope and
yeah,
giving his
they're
speeches.
right. They're going to press him against the existing ineffectual leader, and they think that he's just going to be like they're going to be able to use him because he killed supposedly 25 of the enemy by himself. And he's like, "Men of Conniption, I give you your new leader and the future monarch of the new Conniption Empire." A wave of sound rising in volume. So the guys are really, really about this, and
Yeah.
he immediately goes off script and says, "There we will conquer the port city of Amesh, taking what loot there is to be had. All who pledge loyalty to Cerebus will be made members of our army." So he's immediately like taking advantage of the situation, and the guy's like, and then he's like, basically like, "I'll put you all to death." And
Yeah,
so I
don't
tell
screw
you,
it up or I'll have you flayed alive. And then this dude says, we should start some diplomacy lessons tomorrow. But you get that's his first taste of leadership. And he kind of like he's been putting it off, but there's something I think something happens. I think the suggestion is slightly that something happened, whether he knew it or not, with Jaka that starts to make his opportunist nature more willing to consider leadership positions.
right?
Because like when you've promised someone the world, well, then you've got to go get it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like his ambition, he seems to be more realizing that the riches and power are not the same thing. And when he meets Weishaupt, you know, many issues from now, he's going to actually have that literally be told to him by somebody who's already rich. Like basically, money is for suckers. You don't want money; you want power.
Yeah,
Um, but
because
but
he's been chasing money throughout this first. It's always treasure in this kind of first portion of the series.
right. We should say the conniptions who stick around for another issue have a sort of football chant aspect to them.
Fight, fight, fight.
Might makes right. Might for right. Might for might. Right for right. Fight, fight, fight.
They're like their own cheerleaders. Yeah. So I remember reading, I believe it's in like the note from the president or whatever, or something in some of the back matter in the issue, that on this issue, Dave had Denny fill in the black. He would like put a little X and like have her fill in the black. and he was really unhappy. I think it was this issue, one of the snow issues at least, where he was really unhappy because he realized that he does a lot of like whiteout and designing on the page while he goes.
Right.
And I remember him talking about something about like her blacks were just put in too flat as well. Like they didn't, even though it reproduces flat, like he
Right.
liked having the more variation in the black. And so like he never let her fill in the blacks again.
Right.
But I thought that was a funny thing to experiment with. And look at this design. This is him as a designer. This shadow of this tree lines up almost perfectly with that eye.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get any just weird things like that. It's just paying attention to the small stuff. No, it's not this issue. This is the issue where they invade the big. Yeah, this issue's hilarious though.
Yeah, so Cerebus is actually getting some small scale version of the thing he's been wishing for. He's leading the Conniption army, and they get to this wall, and rather than being the huge, well protected place that he thinks it's going to be, it's essentially abandoned, and so he decides he's going to scout it out for himself. And sees that everybody who's inside the city is building this giant monument. And like I said, we are going to spoil the entire series. This is one of the most poignant things that he comes back to later.
Mm-hmm.
He comes back to this situation in Women, 160 issues later. And I always found that to be a really poignant kind of thing. We get a sort of one-dimensional version of it here, and later you'll get a three-dimensional version of it, the
Mm-hmm.
situation that these guys are in. And so basically, you've got this incredibly intense Rasputin-like fellow inside of the town, and he keeps everybody in the town docile by giving them a drug called Buzz. Him and Cedra, are his girlfriend, are the only people who have any kind of agency at all, and everybody else is essentially a slave to this drug that he gives them. He gives them food and water and drugs, and they are building a monument. And Cerebus thinks like, "Oh, this guy's cut from the same cloth as me." And then when the guy explains what his plan is, which is that he's building a monument to ward off the Venusians.
Yeah, people coming, secret invasion of people from Venus. The second
He
planet
said,
from the sun is mounting its forces. They are coming. Make no mistake about it.
once they get a look at this, that should put a few kinks in their pseudopods.
Yeah. And
And
it
and
kind of is another Cerebus, right? It's like an abstract icon
well,
for Cerebus almost.
yeah. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention is we actually get inside of this guy's name is Kakor. We actually get inside of his head 160 issues later, and he becomes. I think you get a really interesting insight into him in that he is a sort of the cartoonist.
Mm.
This guy is monomaniacally pursuing his goal to the exclusion of everything else. And I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it. So,
Yeah.
cover your ears if
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
want to be spoiled. We find out in 160 issues later that he's trying to build an image that was shown to him of the double helix of the DNA strand.
Oh, okay.
So
Interesting.
he has this goddess visit him in his head, give him visitations, and she gives him a fleeting image of the double helix in an attempt, presumably, to give like higher wisdom to him. His searching for higher wisdom has given him this vision, but he's not capable intellectually of interpreting it in a way that gives anything to him at all. And
I
so
honestly
instead,
don't remember that. Like that's the other thing about Cerebus. You have 300 issues of this really complex, dense world. You can reread it multiple times and be like, man, I don't remember reading this. Or like, think the volumes that you love the first time are the ones you hate this time, and ones you hated the other time are ones that you love. And like, yeah, I
that's right.
honestly don't remember that. That should be a huge moment, and I don't remember it.
Yeah, it's tremendous, and it's tremendously affecting for me too, because of course here he's this powerful guy who's ruling over all of these people that he's enslaved, but there he's essentially like the driven artist as Madman.
Yeah. And that comes
You
up
know,
multiple times, the artist kind of as a theme.
yeah, and sometimes we get the venal side of it, and sometimes we get the, ego side of it. But here we sort of have there's this kind of sadness in the later portrayal, in that he had this grand visitation that didn't mean anything. The slice that he got was too small. I think
Which
there's
could be
something
like a
like,
worry that Dave has, because he really
hmm
had kind of a visionary experience, and then the rest of
right,
his career has been trying to unpack the truth that he thought was given to him. And
right,
I'm sure there are days where he worries whether he's unpacked it right or not, whether it's beyond
yeah,
his capabilities.
and you can just sort of see that as, I mean, there's all different types of ways you can read that. But anyway, it's a very, very loaded thing, and it's just crazy to me that this little thrown away drawing on the back here could be related in that manner. It really makes me wonder, like, how did he come to that? Did he look back at the other issue and was like, that really looks like a double helix?
Or was that like baked in from the beginning and he just didn't
Yeah.
mention it? Like
Yep.
it's hard to tell. And then like talk about throwaway stuff. I don't know that I've ever noticed this, like almost, I don't know, like it's some kind of mix between like Chinese and Mayan, like
Yeah.
statue mask here. Cause I'm looking
hmm
at just, it's just something in those are the kind of just throwaway things that are like, you take that on its own and it's so interesting and well designed. And like, I probably never even noticed that because I'm reading the book and I'm not just sitting staring at the pages, you just kind of read the thing and it's like, yeah, there's a statue there.
Right.
It's impressive. And then
That,
here
that
you
did,
get
uh,
again this
that
theme. Sorry, go ahead.
that one with the statue too. It's got some resonance with the actual dialogue. It says, "Came in ahead of them, eh? Just to be sure. I like that. A courageous king, as I am a courageous demigod. We are admirable figures, you and I." And here
And he's
we've got
almost
a
talking
statue.
to, yeah, he's almost talking
Exactly
to the
right.
statue. Yeah.
Yep.
See, and it's easy to skip over those things. That's why I say this is one of the greatest pieces of art, not just literature or comics or whatever, but of the last, however long, because it's so intentional like that all the way through.
Right.
There's just so much to unpack. And here again, we get the glowing orb as the enemy. And
hmm
and it's not the same glowing orb, but we've had it in issue 2 as the succubus. We've had it
Right.
now as like this energy thing that he has to fight. And this is one of those pages that looks way better in restoration, by the way. Thank you,
Yeah.
Sean. But the
Yeah.
animation and design aspects of pages like this are just amazing as well. But
Well,
this
thank
right here,
thank
I
you.
think in the original, it just looks like 5 black circles and you don't even
Right.
get any of the spray.
Right. Yeah, and thankfully people submitted scans of their issues. Like, these two pages were actually sent to me by Brian Coppola, who owns those two pages. And then an earlier page in this issue was sent to us by Maggie Thompson, who used to run, the Comic Buyer's Guide.
Okay.
And people were just really generous with, scanning stuff and sending it to us. And it's
And
just a huge.
shout out to Brian for being one of our just like ongoing mega supporters. And to me
Mhm.
personally, like Brian's just an awesome guy and we chat all the time. He's a huge collector. He probably has, if not the biggest, at least the second biggest collection of original art, maybe the biggest. He's got a lot of
I,
original Cerebus art.
I think that he's probably got the biggest collection now at this
And
point.
he's just a real supporter of artists. Like his Coppola collection is huge, and it's mostly comic art and cartooning.
Right.
And
So we get a pretty great fight there. This guy who thinks Cerebus thinks is going to be the champion. This guy is totally calm and collected, and Cerebus undermines him with the fairly crazy dialogue. "Oh, Penrovian, eh? Is it true that Penrovians derive sexual satisfaction from small woodland animals? What? Oh, Cerebus had heard that Penrovian men are built so small that anything larger than a titmouse is quite beyond their abilities. Your Majesty, I have been sent to lock swords with you, and I would hope. I saw King Karem in a tavern about fortnight gone. King Karem, Terem be praised that he yet. He offered to drink the contents of a spittoon if I bought him an ale. Cerebus thought that was a pretty gross way to make a living, even for a degenerate sot like Karem."
he's
One
just
more punchline.
working this guy up.
He
Cerebus
flies
heard
out.
the Panrovian March of Virgins had to be canceled. Your daughter got pregnant and your wife refused to march alone. And then the guy immediately misses and sticks his hand into this pot, like he tries to punch him or something. This panel's a bit unclear, but it looks like he tries to punch at him and he gets his hand stuck in a pot. And now he's fighting with the pot on his hand. And he said Dave's so able to go in and out of like these serious themes of like this entire slave society building a giant DNA so when the aliens come, and then you go to like that sequence. And
Yeah.
it's not jarring, it's all fluid.
If anybody knows where this armor comes from, I would love to know. Also, I should say another theory of Lee, the top shelf editor that I mentioned before, is that this actor or that this character is based on Orson Welles.
That
I
portly,
don't.
yeah.
Yeah, portly, intense eyes. I'm not sure. He has Wells's eye ridge and nose and mouth, but I'm not positive. Chiefly, I'm not positive because I haven't seen any roles that he has where he has like this kind of facial hair and stuff.
And wild,
Which,
like the wildness of it. I don't
yeah,
I'm feeling like I have also seen this face like in a cartoon, maybe. There's
okay.
something stylistically about it it's like some of those old EC artists. I don't know exactly which one, if it's Wrightson or Johnny Craig or something, but I don't know. Stylistically, it kind of feels like some of that. So yeah, I wouldn't go Wells on that. I don't know who. There's some actor I'm thinking of, but it's more like the swarthy villain. There's some
Right.
standard swarthy villain actor that he's basing that on that I'm not familiar enough with old movies.
Um, so I think we should probably. Do you think we can do one more issue here?
Yeah. I'll keep going until you tell me to stop.
All right. Let's go ahead and do this last issue for this video here, guys.
Okay.
Um,
And then we'll have
and
to
we'll.
pick back up
Mm-hmm.
with
But
issue. I don't even know what issue we're on because they're not numbered. Look at this
yeah,
spray effect on the snow. That's great.
yeah. This is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is the Merchant of Unshib. Yeah. So this is issue 10. And so by the time we've got 10 issues, we are already seeing some recurring characters. In this case, Cerebus in the snow. I don't know. Yeah, I like this sight gag with having this like shawl around his neck too, and the pack that he's got that seems fairly practical.
Oh, his little backpack. And then
Hmm.
she comes in with the rabbit.
And so, of course, she's got a fur on, but a chainmail bikini is still.
Yeah. And this is the issue. This is the one with the
Yeah.
this is one of the best scenes. This is in that first, I just got Cerebus for the first time and I'm reading it. This scene just absolutely bowled me over and cracked me up. And you get less of this kind of thing as it goes, and I think a lot of people miss that. But she's out in the snow in this chainmail bikini, and I mean everything about a chainmail bikini is patently absurd, including being in the snow in it. And she's trying to seduce him, as she always does, and he's still not having it. And she whips off this chainmail bikini to show her these big old juicy double D's. And Cerebus's comment is, they'd probably heal if you'd stop wearing the chainmail bikini. Because she's like, what do you think of these? And he's like, I don't know, they're nasty and scabby, put them away, please. And God, I love that.
And then up comes somebody with Dave Sims circa 1978's hair.
Yeah.
And this is the guy who she's already currently manipulating. And you get a lot of opportunity in this issue for something that becomes a recurring element, which is people talking at cross purposes to each other,
Mm-hmm.
where they are having a conversation where Sophia thinks she's doing one thing and Cerebus thinks that, you know, he's doing. He wants to get her to talk about the jewels and the valuables, and she wants to try to seduce him so that she can, basically get him to use his abilities to help her out of the situation that she's in.
Yeah, and like
Um,
way
and
later in the series, the way he handles those situations in the dialogue gets even more interesting. But it's something that Dave's curious about from the very beginning, I think, is like just human behavior. I mean,
mhm,
this whole thing is his search for truth, right? But part of that is a truth about human behavior and politics and just interaction between the sexes and power dynamics and all of that. And he
right.
does a really good job of highlighting that
And
in many different ways throughout the series.
in spades here, for instance, like this guy, when he thinks that Cerebus is his opponent, is super aggressive, and as soon as there's a guy who's like a I forgot, Cerebus calls him like a 24-year or something, somebody who's been fighting
Hmm.
uh, in this position for 2 decades. Uh, the guy is just basically falls all over himself to he can't do anything. And
Yeah,
they sort of assert that over and over again. They're not going to kill each other, but the guy with the crossbow has to thump the other guy enough times that he'll stop behaving like he's going to act like he's a man.
yeah,
Whereas Service just talks his way into passivity for the moment.
yeah. And I think it's that, like, I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I was dealing with Dave, maybe it's just because I had read Cerebus, but I could almost feel like he human behavior had become predictable enough to him that he kind of like
Right.
knew where the situation was headed already
Hmm.
and like wanted
Yeah.
to just jump to the end state.
Right.
And then I would also always be like, okay, well, I was like hyper aware of what I was saying, uh because I knew I started to get a sense of how he would interpret the in between the lines of everything that I was
Hmm.
saying, and like I would like not want a certain interpretation to show up. It was a very strange thing to interact with that, but I think some of those things where certain reputational things about Dave, some of it just comes from like this hyper acute
Yeah. He knows.
observations that he's
Right.
made of humanity, and I think a lot of people really are just predictable to him, and it's not interesting. Like,
Right.
it's patterns that he's seen over and over and over again. And every now and then he'll encounter a situation where he thinks he's seen a pattern and it's not actually the case. And because he's right 98% of the time,
Right.
that's where, like that kind of like cantankerous reputation comes from. But it's really
Right.
based on the fact that his observations are accurate 98% of the time.
Yeah, and it's a difficult thing to modulate if you're a type of person who observes other people and you learn what things you're actually picking up on. You're not just having an intuition. You're like learning, like, oh, that person's sitting with their knees away from me right now. Like their knees are pointed away from me, and that actually means something. You can be led to sometimes, like, something's wrong, and you think it must be this one kind of thing, and it can kind of trip
Yeah.
you up. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, it's interesting to see that borne out by the work because, like you said, I mean, he's an intensely observant person who sort of builds lots of frameworks upon those observations, and you can see the same thing happening in the characters' relationships to each other. Anyway, one last motif we should pick up by
Yeah.
the end of this issue is Cerebus pretending to be transformed, uh, and essentially like persuading these guys that he's somebody else who's been transformed by sorcerers uh,
Right here.
into, just by putting a big blanket on himself and presenting himself as it is. All these guys run away. He takes the invaluable magical object and just is able to walk away with it and not have to split it 4 ways, which is what he was going to have to do before. So he pretends to be brave and valorous. He's going to be the one who's the advanced troop. In reality, he tricks everybody and leaves with it. So Cerebus as trickster is a pretty consistent, like, sort of sub through line for, I don't know, what would you say, the first 100
Well,
issues?
it's just part of his character, and I think that goes exactly to like what we were just talking about, is that when facts about human psychology become obvious to you. I think for you it was reading like that Desmond Morris book, right?
Yeah.
Like that
Hmm.
Desmond Morris book made all these behavioral facts, and you're talking about, oh, someone's turning their knees away, and like that's getting in your head while you're talking to someone because you know
Yeah.
all of that. Whereas like Dave just intuited all of that. I think, you know, like I mean, he's a high school dropout, and he's just figured all this shit out, and all of that stuff's intuitive to him. When people are that see-through to you, of course you can be a master manipulator too. And so I
Hmm.
think Cerebus as a character is very intuitively savvy about human behavior, and this is exactly one of those scenes where he can use that to manipulate them. And it's like, I don't have to sword fight everyone, I can outsmart a lot of you. And I think that's part of the character arc of the first volume, is him learning these psychological manipulations. He doesn't always just have to bust out his sword.
Right. Um, should we finish this face to face?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wise observation that you've got there. And I actually very recently saw somebody allude to something online. I actually commented. I rarely comment on, Cerebus like discussions, because there's so much stuff I would correct if I actually commented on it. I would just feel like a mad person, just
Yeah.
like correcting the record every single comment. But somebody alluded to the idea that Cerebus is a stand-in for the author. And I think a better way to think about it, absolutely not true, number one, in terms of a literal one-to-one. But I think, at least especially in the beginning, I think thinking about him as a sort of like pseudo, sometimes avatar who is unchained, unrestricted in a way
Yeah.
that a real person never would, might be a little bit more of a avatar, in the sense of somebody who's like a fourth, goes ahead of you to investigate beforehand, and acts more extremely than you do, and maybe feels things much much more extremely
Yeah,
than you.
I feel like I get why people say that, because there are, especially working with Dave, there are a lot of things where you see like, oh, that's that part of Cerebus's character. Like that's where that
Mhm.
part's derived from. And I think like anyone who's read it all the way through also gets a sense that like Cerebus's fate is kind of like what Dave wants for himself, like to
Mm.
be
Yeah.
isolated in this bunker by himself, you know, like there seems to be a prophetic element to how the series ends, or maybe a hope for a self-fulfilling prophecy or something. So I get why people think that, but I also think that's reductive. It's
Mhm.
probably a sub personality of Dave's, like it's a tendency of Dave's or something that's then been exaggerated and amplified, because I also think other characters amplify and
Yes.
exaggerate other parts of Dave's personality. So the I don't think it's Cerebus the character is an avatar for Dave. I think Cerebus the book
Yeah.
is Dave's brain on paper trying to figure itself out as
Right.
it goes. And that's what makes it the most compelling. And I'll go all of human history here. It makes it the most compelling document to me,
Mm.
in that it's 25 years of someone's brain evolving their thought patterns in the public eye, month by month. And it's that month by month evolution happening in an interaction with a live audience that I think is unique to Cerebus, that nothing else had. There's
Mhm.
plenty of, like, Berserk goes on for longer, but I don't think Berserk was as intentional of a quest for the truth. And I don't
Mhm.
think Berserk was manipulating and utilizing the audience as parts
Yeah.
of the experiment in the way that
Mhm.
Cerebus was. So yes, there's, like, I would say there's probably some truth to that, but expand it to the whole book, and I think you get a much better,
Yeah.
that statement makes a lot more sense when you're talking about the series rather than the character.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the tiny little pushback, just that there are a few sort of author avatar moments in the first volume, specifically like, I think Jaka as a character, being an amalgamation of certain women that he knew, um,
Oh yeah,
po-
pretty obvious.
positing her as a love interest to the main character, and also, um, Cerebus is the same age um, in the early ones, the ones that are actually progressing in real time. So the book makes note of his birthday at various times. Bran McMuffin suggests the age that he is
So
at
he
one
would have
point.
been the same age as Dave at that point.
Yeah,
Is what you're
exactly.
suggesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's hard also to say that it's not a stand-in for Dave at all. Like there's obvious
oh yeah,
components of it that
yeah,
are really obvious. And yeah, it gets more complicated by, again, spoiler alerts, but I think it's pretty well known that Dave actually shows up as Dave
right.
in the
Yeah,
book. So that complicates the matter of like
right.
self-representation, because he's very
Hmm.
obviously just himself at points.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't buy it as self-representation. I just wanted to throw those little details out there as like things that somebody could point to. But I think that that's part of the clubhouse atmosphere of the first couple issues, especially.
Yeah.
This is art that was being made for a group of people who shared interest in certain kinds of things. And part of the reason it's even a fantasy comic is because that was what the group of people were interested in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyway, little shout outs throughout the thing to his influences, by the way, including Cerebus lamenting the loss of the Ram and Peacock Tavern, uh, which the Ram and the Peacock is the name of a Barry Windsor Smith print that was one of the most
Um,
uh, uh, motivating early art experiences that he had when he listened to Barry Windsor Smith pontificate about a print called The Ram and the Peacock and talk about it for like 15 minutes about the
Interesting.
unpacking the symbolic value of various aspects of the picture.
So like that was Dave realizing how much you could pack in intentionally.
Exactly.
Interesting. Interesting. That's
So
pretty cool. I wonder, has anyone done like an annotated Cerebus where they've picked out all the Easter eggs?
there is a document that somebody made midway through the series that doesn't makes an attempt to make a timeline for everything, and that's probably the closest anybody's got. And then there was a Margaret had a wiki up for a while that had a lot of those included. But no, as far as I know, a really complex, uh, thorough one hasn't been done. And there's new stuff. I mean, it's just everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you don't have to like, um, you can be somebody could get a lot of new ground uh, just by doing it and writing down the stuff that's already sort of out there. But yeah, it's frustrating sometimes to just realize like I just don't know. I feel like this is a reference to something, uh, but I don't
I
know what it is yet.
And Margaret doesn't have a lot of that stuff on. By the way, Margaret Liss is like the official Cerebus archivist that has all of
Hmm.
Dave's like notebooks and stuff. And
Yeah,
that's all at cerebusfangirl.com, and then also like articles for Matt Dow's moment of Cerebus for people who want to get into those Easter eggy
yeah,
really. And if you're curious about like Dave's, when we're talking about Dave being really intentional about everything he does, I mean, that stuff's all written and on the record too. I mean,
yeah.
probably thousands and thousands of pages for
Hmm.
people who are interested in that in depth of a look into the decision making processes that he used while he was making the book.
Yeah, and we will come back to this next time we pick up the very next issue, Merchant of Unshib, which is Dave doing Eisner
Yeah,
for
and
many, many
also
panels.
this is, I think, where that's a good break point, because that's really where it starts to become a little more serious, or a little
Yep.
more continuous of a narrative.
Yep.
So I think that's a
And
perfect break point, because
and that'll enable us to move a little faster as well,
hopefully.
because a little bit less of density to the story, a little bit
I,
less.
I don't know, man. I could still do like a page by
I
page
know
breakdown,
it's
probably
nothing.
more so as it goes later. But anyways, this will take us a while, but we'll get there eventually, as we like take a break and refresh and then come back to it.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoy. And Carson, roll those ads.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.